What's up? Today we're talking about watercraft carburetors and something that is known as pop-off. And it's something that's you should know if you own a carbureted jet ski. So first we'll talk about the fuel pump, and that's a pretty typical, it's a vacuum driven fuel pump. You've got your inlet and outlet of fuel, and you've got a little vacuum drip. This is just coming off the crankcase, so it takes a pulse of air from the crankcase, and that moves like a diaphragm, like this, up and down, creates suction and pressure. Then you've got two little one-way valves so that only fuel can come in through the inlet and fuel can come out here. Now, this pump has two outlets. This is just back to the fuel tank for excess fuel, and then the other outlet will be here, where it's all butted up and sealed together. And so this is the fuel going to the carb system. So that's a pretty basic system. I don't think we need to go into much detail there, but here is where things get kind of complicated. Not really complicated, but it's different from your conventional needle valve carburetor. If you're used to say a motorcycle carb, or if you just have never dealt with carbs before, this is where you need to understand what's going on, because it's finicky, and it can cause a lot of problems with just minor solutions. So anyhow, there's a journal through the middle of the carb. Fuel comes in right here. This is what's called your needle valve. That's the only part of a watercraft carb that even has needle in the name. There's no needle. There's no tapered anything other than these adjustment screws. There's no needle valve for the main jet, and that's the biggest difference between a watercraft carb and a motorcycle. So let's just follow the fuel. You've got your diaphragm right here, and this is somewhat of a regulator. The other side of this is it's atmospheric pressure is what it is. The two sides of the diaphragm are atmospheric pressure and then venturi vacuum. When air flows down the throat of a carb, it creates that's the venturi effect. It creates extra suction that is higher vacuum than the atmosphere, so that'll cause this diaphragm to go in. Depending on how much air is flowing in, which is going to depend on engine speed, that's going to regulate how far in this diaphragm is pressed and how far open this needle valve becomes. So that's just getting fuel in here, not directly to the venturi where the fuel mixes with the air. Underneath this, you'll find the fuel makes its way through this little, I don't know what to call this, but this is just, there's a little flap here that kind of, what does that do? That kind of offsets your, it smooths out the flow of fuel. So anyhow, you end up with fuel by these two jets, and those are jets. Obviously they're specific to this carb, but just like any other jet in any other carb, it just regulates the flow by the size of the hole. So you've got a low speed and you've got a high speed, and so this would be a secondary regulator, let's call it that, because you're going to need extra fuel pressure to get that fuel through here into your main jet, whereas this low speed jet is effectively always open. So at idle, when this guy, there's maybe a little fuel sleeping through here, the fuel just kind of trickles into your low speed. There's no extra barrier for that fuel to go through. And so that's why you'll see a lot of times a ski may start and you give it a little throttle and it'll kind of start to rev up, but then it just falls flat on its face. That is obviously lack of fuel, and that symptom can be caused by other things too, but a lot of times what's happening is you're not popping off, and that would be this little flap opening and fuel going into your main jet and into the carb. And so it's simply a lack of fuel. But what you have to understand is that opening is driven, assuming you have the right amount of fuel coming in. You could have other fuel system issues, but that opening is driven by suction in the venturi of this carburetor, which is engine speed. So you'll see there's specs in the service manuals and stuff on what pressure you should have to apply to this needle for it to open, the amount of turns on your low speed and high speed. But what you need to understand is that your low speed screw is regulating the fuel that is going to your low speed jet, and your high speed is regulating the fuel that goes to your high speed jet. The key thing to adjusting these carbs is you've got to have enough fuel to get to the point where your main jet will open up. So if you say you do a carb job and you go out and it's still kind of cutting out at half throttle or third throttle or somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. And we'll show you, we'll put in the video a chart by BRP that shows an example and a diagram of when pop-off should happen and what jets take over and when. If you go out and it's falling on its face right after a fresh carb rebuild, you probably didn't do anything wrong. Maybe you did. You are supposed to measure, the bend of this little tab. You definitely want it flat and all that. There's definitely plenty of places to mess up, but a lot of times you just need to open up this low speed screw a little bit, and what that will do is give the engine enough fuel to rev up a little higher to increase the suction enough to open up fuel passage to your main speed jet. And once you have fuel flowing through the main speed, okay, great, that's enough to rev way up high to the moon and give you all the power you need.